In this brief video, I'm going to show you a little bit about how you can use PowerPoint to create a poster suitable for presenting scientific ideas. As you can see, I've opened a new document in PowerPoint, but haven't done anything else yet. The first thing that we want to do is to resize our canvas to account for the fact that rather than presenting on a screen, we're going to be printing out a poster. Now, most posters are typically 4 feet wide by 3 feet tall. To account for that, you'll want to go to the File menu and select Page Setup. You can see that the options include width, which we'll want to set to 48 inches, and height, which we'll want to set to 36 inches. You can now see that we have something quite a lot larger, and in fact that title box that was previously there has now been scaled up to 288 point font. Now that's perhaps not quite what we want, and so I'm going to get rid of these. But this is now the canvas from which to work. Now PowerPoint has a lot of fancy color and design options available, but I find that for most scientific posters, that tends to be a little bit overkill, because your poster should be primarily figures anyway. So this Insert menu up here is really useful because it's where you'll be getting most of the tools that you're going to use for this presentation. One of the first things to do is to put in a title. And you can see within that title, our font is now pretty small. So if I were writing about my own research, I might talk about something like heterobinuclear units for artificial photosynthesis. Now, that's pretty unreasonably small. A font size of something around 100 tends to be about appropriate, and we might want to center it. From there, you can see that there's this big box up at the top now, but where should it go? One of the things when it comes to design is that you typically want your design either to be centered or very clearly not centered. Things that look almost centered but not quite right, or almost symmetrical but not quite right, tend to be a little bit bothersome to the eye. Now, PowerPoint is fairly nice in that if you right-click on an object like this, you have some options in terms of how you can arrange that object. So while I have it selected, I'm going to go up here to Arrange, and you can see that there's an option to Align. And by aligning it to the center, I can now be confident that this title is exactly in the middle of the page. Likewise, I'm now going to also want to insert a text box for something like my name. And again, for most of these, we'll want a larger font. But it doesn't have to be enormously larger to be effective. And again, I'll align this to the center. Now, there are multiple ways that you can set up a poster. As you saw in the video where we looked at some posters from around the halls of St. Lawrence, often a nice way to arrange your poster is in 3 columns. Now, to do that, you're going to want to start by putting in some text boxes for your other content. So here, for instance, we might have the abstract. I've zoomed in a little bit. You can see this font is a little small, but you can and should use a font that is much smaller than your overall title for these subsection titles so that you have enough room to fit everything on the page. You can see I've bolded the title. Now, I've written out some specific text here, but I would recommend that you try to minimize your blocks of text. And if you do have to have text, bullet points can be a useful tool to split apart your text and make it easier to read. And though I have a fair amount of text here in the abstract, overall I would recommend that that should probably be the place that has the most text. That is, it's okay to basically paste your abstract in from your paper, but elsewhere you'll want to try to minimize the text and insert more figures. To do that, we should probably talk about how to put in figures. Now, you can do this either from the home bar, where you can see this option for a picture is here, or from the Insert tab, where again, there's an option to insert a picture. Picture from File is typically the easiest way to do this. And you can see here, for instance, that I have a whole bunch of figures in a folder where I might want to use them. So, for instance, I might want to put in a figure about artificial photosynthesis. Now, that figure came in quite small. You can adjust a figure by changing its size just by dragging, but if you know the width of your text box, which you can set up from Format Shape, from Size and Position, there we go, where we could set its width to, for instance, something like 12. By the way, 12 might not be quite the right width here, but keep in mind that if you have something that is 48 inches wide, and you want 1 inch at either edge, and 1 inch between each of your columns, that makes a total 48 minus 4 of 44 inches of usable space, and 44 divided by 3 is about 14 or 15 inches wide. So we might want to make our figures the same width as that abstract box. And as you can see here from these dotted lines, PowerPoint is attempting to align these things with each other. That size and position option is also available for pictures. And one of the things you can see about the size and also the position is that we can use those options to easily adjust and make everything lined up with each other. So for instance, both this figure and this text box are now 1 inch away from the edge of the poster. We can keep inserting pictures, and remember, I would recommend that you probably want mostly pictures in your presentation. And with each picture that you bring in, you'll want to adjust its position and its size so that it fits well. Now, just as is the case with, just as is the case in your papers, you will want each of your figures to have a figure caption. It's primarily in these figure captions that you will be conveying most of the information about your project. So most of the poster that you make is going to be made out of text boxes and pictures that you insert. The only difference here is going to be that most of the pictures you use will be coming from the papers you selected. So zooming out again, you can start to see an idea of what is appearing in the presentation and how it would look. And you can perhaps already get a little bit of a feel for why I recommended using nothing a lot more fancy than a white background and black text. Scientific figures tend to be really bright, really colorful, and bring a lot of busyness to an image. So if you have a really bright, aggressive design like one of the ones that PowerPoint uses, the result is that it tends to make the presentation a little bit overwhelming. Additionally, you can see one of the other challenges here. Many images that you get will have a white background, and if you put them on something that is brightly colored, you will find a white box around each of your pictures that doesn't look particularly good. By comparison, if you use a plain white background, those white boxes will be invisible. Remember, as you set up your sections here, that you broadly want to have the same organization as your paper. So starting from an abstract, moving into background, the current state of research, and the future of the field. Last but not least, you'll want to be sure to have a references section and to cite all of the figures and information in your poster using those superscripted numbers in just the same way that you did in your paper. One more thing I should probably mention before you go. I talked a little bit about fonts as an important part of designing your poster. Microsoft's default font is Calibri, but if you want to use a different font under the Format menu option up at the top, you can see that there's a Replace Fonts option where we can go in and, for instance, replace Calibri with some other font. Helvetica is a nice font. You can see that updated all of the fonts in the presentation at the same time. The good thing about that is it allows you to make changes. So ultimately, assembling your poster is going to come down to setting up PowerPoint with the correct canvas size, setting up your fonts to some reasonable sizes, and then working through the process of inserting figures, captions, and small amounts of text that convey the same narrative that you set up in your paper.